Cleopatra, the most beautiful and dangerous woman in history. The temptress who bewitched the most powerful men in the world, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. This is the legend passed down to us in myths and movies. But is this the real Cleopatra? Or is this the fiction created by her enemies? Today, new evidence is revealing a different Cleopatra, magnetic, ambitious, and visionary, a daring queen who nearly conquered the world, the real Cleopatra. For 2,000 years, Cleopatra has been a fascinating riddle.
She's something about whom we know very little, except that it's irresistible.
But behind the myth, a remarkable personality lies hidden.
Cleopatra dreamt of universal empire. She wanted to be queen of the world.
40 years before the birth of Christ, one woman threatens the mighty Roman Empire.
They were worried because she was something larger than life, something mythic, something terrifying, yes. She was supposed to be sexually indefatigable, something that has fed the tradition from then until Cecil de Bede-Meal.
But seduction is just one of her many strategies.
Cleopatra seems to have been an extremely good self-publicist. What she used was a kind of grand theatre.
To find this new Cleopatra, we must look beyond Greek and Roman propaganda and unlock the Egyptian evidence.
The story of Cleopatra has been preserved for us because Western scholars have always been able to read Greek and Latin. We've not been able to read Egyptian hieroglyphs until 1820. And we are now beginning to sift through and review the ancient Egyptian evidence. By looking at the Eastern and Egyptian sources, we're getting a more complete picture of who the queen was.
She is the queen of a nation nearly as old as civilization itself. The pyramids of the pharaohs are as ancient to Cleopatra as she is to us today. She is Greek, not Egyptian. Cleopatra is born in 69 BC, the third of 6 children, a member of the Greek dynasty, the Ptolemies. She is raised in Alexandria, then the largest and most opulent city in the world. From her father, King Ptolemy XII, Cleopatra learns of the glorious conquests of her ancestors. Cleopatra's story really begins nearly 3 centuries before her time, with Alexander the Great. He conquered Egypt and most of Asia, burning with the vision of a united empire of the East and West. After his death, one of his generals became king of Egypt, Ptolemy the first of Cleopatra's royal line. The first 3 Ptolemies expanded their empire far beyond Egypt's borders, but by Cleopatra's time, the kingdom has shrunk drastically and is deep in debt to Rome. Most of Egypt's neighbors have already been swallowed by Rome's expanding empire. Cleopatra's father bargains with Rome to keep Egypt free, but his people see him as a Roman puppet. Public anger drives Cleopatra's father out of Alexandria. Her elder sisters steal the throne. Both are murdered. Her father raids the treasury and pays the Romans a king's ransom to buy back his throne.
Cleopatra's a young girl at this period, but must have been impressionable. And so when she saw what Roman might, military might, and what Roman money were able to bring to the table to further the cause of her father, who was eventually restored because of this, she realized that in order to further her goal, she too needed Roman money and Roman might.
She will never forget the lessons of Roman power. With her sisters eliminated, Cleopatra is now directly in line for the throne. She's educated as a potential ruler according to the most advanced Greek curriculum.
She was clearly very intelligent. According to Plutarch, she spoke 9 languages. This is possibly an exaggeration, but she was certainly, for instance, one of the first, the first one of the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt to bother to learn to speak the Egyptian language. Her forebears all spoke Greek, and only Greek.
And also, of course, what we have to think about is that she was the child of 3 centuries of consistent incest. And the interesting thing about repeated incest is that while it can sometimes produce the real village idiot, it can also concentrate the genes wonderfully, which it obviously did in Cleopatra's case. I mean, it threw up a real concentration, a cocktail of brilliance in her.
We do not know who Cleopatra's mother was. The most likely candidate, her father's first wife, his sister. There is a long tradition of brother-sister marriages among the Ptolemies.
This whole business of sister wives, what I think of as whiffsters, it's partly inherited from the pharaonic tradition. It's partly religious. But even more, I think, it was a form of self-protection in a period when it was very difficult to trust one's outer siblings.
When Cleopatra's father dies, he leaves his kingdom to 18-year-old Cleopatra and her 10-year-old brother. The young queen quickly takes charge. She faces huge challenges. She wants to keep Egypt from being swallowed by Rome. And someday, perhaps regain the lands her ancestors once ruled. The Cleopatra of legend is a spoiled, frivolous young woman, but the Egyptian evidence presents a very different picture.
I think Cleopatra was a serious queen. We've got a series of decrees that she passed which showed that she was really concerned for Egypt, that she was dealing in a very positive way with the problems that faced the country. There were a couple of years when the Nile was really low and corn was in short supply.
Only the flood of the sacred Nile stands between Egypt and starvation. But in the first years of Cleopatra's reign, the Nile fails. There is hunger even in wealthy Alexandria.
She sent out an edict, it survived on papyrus, saying that no corn was to be sent up the Nile to the south, where perhaps the prices were higher. All corn was to be sent north to Alexandria. She was concerned to feed the people in the cities of her country, those who had no access to food.
To her Egyptian subjects, Cleopatra is a foreigner, a Greek. To win their loyalty, she realizes she must embrace the ancient religion of the pharaohs. She will not only worship their gods, she will become a god. Hieroglyphs record her first dramatic public appearance. Within a month of assuming the throne, she travels far up the Nile to lead a native procession dedicated to Bucus, the bull god.
The sacred bulls were very important to Egypt. They represented the fertility, the strength of the country.
Her subjects must be deeply impressed. On the engraving, she is called a goddess. One monument shows us Cleopatra ruling alone, dressed as a male pharaoh, worshipping the goddess Isis. We know it is Cleopatra from the Greek inscription.
There's none of this nonsense about her and her co-ruler, her young brother. It's her. She knew where she was going right from the beginning.
It is not the path her father had intended. There had been powerful women in the Ptolemaic dynasty before Cleopatra. But none dared to claim the throne for herself. Cleopatra has no intention of sharing power with her brother. But her ambitious plans cost her dearly. Egypt's young queen is driven off the throne by her brother's supporters. She takes refuge among the desert tribes. But she will be back, with the most powerful man in the world as her ally. September 48 BC. As Cleopatra raises an army in exile, the new strongman of Rome sails into Alexandria harbor. Julius Caesar has come to collect the huge debt owed to Rome by Cleopatra's late father. For Cleopatra, the Roman is both a dangerous stranger and a possible ally against her brother, the teenaged king. As Caesar lands, anti-Roman riots break out. Caesar is not easily scared off. He occupies a royal palace, demanding money and an end to the family feud. He summons Cleopatra and her brother. To avoid her brother's forces, she has herself hidden in a carpet and smuggled into Caesar's quarters. A dramatic entrance that has caught the imagination of the ages.
And it's quite possible that this story is true. It's become the basis for hundreds of more or less pornographic representations which show Cleopatra springing out of this bundle like a kind of dancing girl out of a cake. And it probably wasn't quite like that. But the story is quite well attested, and it describes a young woman of terrific courage and aplomb.
Caesar is 52, a seasoned military commander, a brilliant politician, a scholar, a married man. Cleopatra is only 21, but the attraction between them is immediate.
Caesar was a well-known womanizer. There's a song that his legionnaires used to sing, "Home we bring our bald whoremonger, Romans lock your wives away." They were very proud of the fact that he was a conqueror of women as well as a conqueror of countries.
You know, the whole relationship of Caesar with Cleopatra I find a fascinating one. I mean, here was a man whose sophistication was enormous, who also had a reputation of being sexually subtle, which most Romans were not, and who had a razor-sharp mind, which indeed she did too.
Sometime during the night, Cleopatra convinces Caesar to support her cause against her brother. Sometime during the night, they become lovers. So how did Cleopatra win the mighty Caesar? Legend tells of her irresistible beauty, but the historical evidence says otherwise.
Well, the only contemporary descriptions we have of her, which is second-hand, but it says that she didn't have the kind of looks which inspire passion. She seems to have been capable of inspiring passion, but by other means.
Plutarch says, if you went into a cocktail party, you would not notice Cleopatra, or no heads would do a double take when she entered the room.
Nearly every image of Cleopatra from her own time has been lost. Only 3 busts remain. This is the most flattering. The hair swept back into a bun, the large nose, and the wide royal hairband identify the queen. But is this depiction accurate? Busts of this period were often designed to make a political statement, not to capture someone's likeness. Coins issued during Cleopatra's reign provide our best clues.
The coins were minted on her orders and presumably had her approval. They can't have been that unflattering, so I think one has to assume that she did look something like that. Although the coin images they're pretty crude, so I think they should be seen more as caricatures than as accurate likenesses.
The coins may be crude, but they do share some common features. A determined brow, a generous mouth with a curved lower lip, a long nose. Modern animation gives us a glimpse of what the real Cleopatra might have looked like.
Everybody wants to know what she looked like. I always remember Pascal's remark about if Cleopatra's nose had been shorter, the whole face of the world might have been changed. She had the Ptolemy schnoz, which was always strong.
What the queen lacked in looks, she made up in personality. According to the Greek writer Plutarch, she was magnetic, her conversation fascinating, her voice a sheer delight.
And in that fateful moment when Julius Caesar comes to Alexandria and meets Cleopatra, it isn't the old man and the sex kitten as Hollywood and some of our Western playwrights make, but it's a man who looks at this ambitious woman who is as ambitious as he is. And I think the relationship was, on the one point, a meeting of the minds. There was this dynamic chemistry. They both were after the same thing. And that might have intensified the sexual relationship. I think it's a multidimensional relationship that sex was not the component element, although it must have been very, very good.
The morning after his liaison with Cleopatra, Caesar decrees that brother and sister should be reconciled and rule Egypt together. For a few weeks, things are peaceful. Caesar settles down to life in Alexandria. sampling its many intellectual pleasures. But peace does not last. Supporters of her brother, the king, ignite a bloody civil war. After months of fighting, the forces of Cleopatra and Caesar prevail. The teenaged king drowns in the Nile. Again, Caesar restores the throne to Cleopatra. Her surviving 12-year-old brother is made her husband and co-monarch. But in effect, she rules alone. When the war ends, Caesar leaves Egypt. Soon a son is born to Cleopatra. The people of Alexandria quickly nickname him Caesarion, son of Caesar. A coin shows her suckling the infant in the guise of the goddess Isis with her son Horus. Isis is the most popular deity in Egypt, the all-powerful goddess of 10,000 names, who ensures the fertility of the land. To her people, Cleopatra becomes the living reincarnation of the goddess herself.
And in presenting herself as the goddess Isis, she was presenting herself in a very positive way, as her subjects would have understood it, in a way which is almost diametrically opposed to the way she's been remembered, not as the irresponsible temptress, but as a mother figure.
When Cleopatra sails to Rome with her young son, Caesar invites her to set up court on his estate outside the city. The Romans are both scandalized and fascinated. Whether Caesar acknowledges Caesarion as his son is not known, but his esteem for the boy's mother is clear. In the new Temple of Venus, he places a golden statue of Cleopatra. A bold statement indeed. Venus is the Roman version of Isis, the mother of all the Romans. Caesar is honoring Cleopatra as a queen in language that touches his people's hearts.
You bring this woman into Rome, you install her in a garden, in a temple dedicated to Venus, a woman who, in her own culture, can be identified with Venus. So what in fact he's saying, and the elite would have understood this, is, hey, Romans, I'm bringing your ancestor back home. Now, that fits in very, very well with Caesar's agenda for aspiring to universal power.
Some historians speculate that Caesar and Cleopatra were formulating a spectacular blueprint for an empire, one which would unite Rome, Egypt, Europe, and Asia under their joint rule. But while Caesar dreams of world domination, his own people fear his growing power. Rumors spread that he intends to abolish the Senate and rule as king. In 44 BC, on the Ides of March, conspirators attack him in the Senate. Mighty Caesar falls. Cleopatra's dreams fall with him. She has lost her lover and her protector. Caesar's will makes no mention of her or Caesarion, naming his great-nephew Octavian as his heir. It is time to go home. A few weeks after her return to Alexandria, Cleopatra's co-ruler, her young brother, is dead, probably murdered on her orders. She elevates 3-year-old Caesarion to share her throne. Egypt's queen and Caesar's son. Together, they can lay claim to the entire Mediterranean world. 44 BC. Cleopatra is just 25 years old. In the aftermath of Caesar's death, Rome is in chaos. Without Roman support, Cleopatra must now try to make the throne secure for herself and her son. To broadcast her propaganda, the queen uses the medium of the ancient pharaohs, massive monuments. At the Dendera temple in southern Egypt, in a vast engraving, she makes one of her boldest statements to the Egyptian people. Cleopatra is shown worshipping the gods of the temple, with her son Caesarion depicted as a grown-up pharaoh. Facing them is the son of Isis, Horus, and then the goddess herself. Like Cleopatra, Isis had a mate, Osiris, who had been hacked to death, and a child, Horus. The wall relief spells out, like a giant billboard, that Cleopatra and her son are just like Isis and her son.
So it is a dynastic statement, and just as the Horus child, who is the son of Isis, is the legitimate successor of his deceased father Osiris on a religious plane, so too Caesarion should be the person who should succeed Julius Caesar.
In Rome, two men have seized power. Octavian, Caesar's 19-year-old grandnephew and heir, and Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted aide. Antony and Octavian split the empire between them. Octavian takes Western Europe. Antony takes the rich eastern provinces near Egypt. Antony departs immediately to raise money for his troops in his new domain. A robust, pleasure-loving man, Antony is said to bear the bold and masculine look of the hero god Hercules. Married for the third time, he is a brilliant cavalry officer and an able speaker and politician. But unlike his mentor, Julius Caesar, his quick mind lacks discipline.
Caesar seems to be a man of great self-control, who knew precisely what he was doing at all times. Antony, on the other hand, was known for his self-indulgence, his drunkenness, his irresistibility to women, and his inability to resist women. So he was, in many ways, Caesar's antithesis.
His soldiers loved him as long as he was successful, because he was hail fellow, well met with them, drank with them, ate with them. But he did not have, I think, 1/10 of the intellectual force and attraction of character that Caesar had had.
As he travels through his new domains, crowds hail Mark Antony as the new Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and immortality. In 41 BC, Cleopatra receives an intriguing letter. Antony is seeking Egyptian support for his invasion of Parthia in present-day Iran. For weeks, Cleopatra keeps him waiting. Finally, she agrees to meet him at Tarsus, in what is now southeast Turkey. Cleopatra stages her arrival as a dazzling theatrical spectacle, traveling in a royal barge with a golden stern and billowing purple sails. She reclines under a golden canopy, dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love. She entertains Antony at a magnificent banquet that goes on for 4 days. Once again, a mighty Roman commander falls for her charms. It is a legendary romance. but firmly grounded in political realities.
They needed each other politically and economically. Cleopatra, by this time, was ruling Egypt efficiently enough that she had funds, which Antony desperately needed. And he came to her looking for money to pay his troops, for timber to build his ships, for a political partnership with one of the most important monarchs in the region that he now wished to establish himself as overlord. So when they met, they had a mixture of sort of pragmatic motives.
Cleopatra has an ambitious agenda of her own. She hopes Antony can replace Caesar as her new ally. Through the grand theater she stages at Tarsus, Cleopatra makes her aspirations known.
We have to understand that these are, this is ceremony, this is pomp, this is circumstance. Everything is being couched in ritual which has meaning, and that meaning is very, very easily understood.
Cleopatra portrays her alliance with Antony as the union of two popular gods, Aphrodite and Dionysus. It is her way of inviting Antony to join with her and rule the Mediterranean world. Antony joins Cleopatra in Alexandria. The queen arranges an endless round of parties and diversions. But she never forgets her larger purpose.
And there's a story that Plutarch tells about Antony going out fishing, and Cleopatra somehow arranged for a dried fish to be hung on his hook. And when he pulled it in, she was there beside him, and she turned to him, teasing him, and said, "You shouldn't be fishing for this trash. You should be fishing for kingdoms and empires."
But soon, power struggles at home force Antony to leave Egypt and return to Rome. After he leaves, Cleopatra gives birth to Antony's twins. Antony's wife dies, but instead of returning to Cleopatra, he marries Octavian's sister, a political marriage of convenience. Once again, it seems Cleopatra has lost her hold on Rome. For the next 3 years, she devotes herself to governing Egypt. She is a capable and popular ruler. But regaining the wider empire of her ancestors seems to lie beyond her grasp. In the autumn of 37 BC, Antony is in Syria, preparing to invade Parthia. He summons Cleopatra. They spend the winter in passionate reunion. But as always, the lovers have powerful political motives. Cleopatra was raised on the sagas of her ancestors' glory. Partnership with Antony holds out even greater promise, a revival of Alexander the Great's united empire of the East and West. Cleopatra will provide money, ships, and men. In return, she drives a hard bargain. She demands and gets from Antony vast territories that have been under Roman control. In one stroke, Cleopatra has reclaimed nearly all of her ancestors' domains. Antony invades Parthia with an enormous army. The campaign is a disaster. By the time he retreats to Syria, he has lost nearly half of his men. Has Cleopatra picked the wrong man as her ally?
He was probably the only candidate around who might have been able to help her realize her goal. And if you look at the power politics of the late Roman and early imperial aspect of Rome, Antony was a big player earlier on. He certainly, on paper, could have brought to the table what she needed to be able to realize this dream. But I don't think he had the character to be able to bring it about.
She had to make the best she could of him, and she made the best she could of him, and it wasn't enough.
In the months to come, Antony does manage to conquer Armenia. Back in Egypt, he stages a spectacular ceremony that comes to be known as the Donations of Alexandria. Dressed as Dionysus, with Cleopatra as Isis, Antony grants vast realms to his children, even lands he has not yet conquered. Rome is not amused.
Why the Romans were so outraged by the donations of Alexandria was because in this little piece of theatre, or enormous, grand piece of theatre, it was made very plain that what Antony was doing was no longer attempting to conquer dominions for Rome. He was attempting to build an empire for himself, with Cleopatra as his partner.
Antony makes an official proclamation that Caesarion is Caesar's son, his legitimate son, an outright challenge to Octavian, his rival. The empire Antony and Cleopatra are planning obviously includes Rome itself. An official Roman coin is issued by Antony with his own likeness on one side and a radical new image of Cleopatra on the other. Her youthful profile is replaced by an elderly face with severe, almost masculine features. A portrait meant to conform with Roman notions of a virtuous matron. Octavian strikes back. He launches a bitter propaganda war against Cleopatra. His depiction of her has survived for 2,000 years. Debauched, dangerous, promiscuous. The harlot queen wears herself out fornicating with her servants. It is said any man who refuses to sleep with her faces execution.
It's extraordinary how persistent Octavian's propaganda has been. I mean, you look at all these movies that have been made, she is the Oriental vamp. And that's the one thing that Octavian plugged again and again. This was outlandish, Oriental stuff, weird religions, and insatiable and indiscriminate sex. I don't think so. There is no solid evidence for her having had any sexual connections at all, except first with Caesar and then with Antony.
And the Roman texts don't say, oh, while you were going out with Antony, you were sleeping with Tom, Dick, and Harry. They simply call her trollop and harlot. But they never actually prove that.
To Octavian, Antony has become a man bewitched by love. Cleopatra has turned a great Roman military man into a weak-willed slave.
The Romans saw the Egyptians as being pathetically decadent for various reasons, but the main one was that they allowed themselves to be ruled by a woman. In the sort of Roman sources, you find a real horror of what happens to a man if he allows a woman to have any kind of influence over him whatsoever. And of course, again, that overlaps with the kind of sexual fear and a horror of the kind of sexual allure that women can exert.
Octavian persuades the Senate to formally strip Antony of all of his powers. Then he declares war, not against Antony, but against the Egyptian queen. To survive, Cleopatra knows she must now conquer Rome itself. Greece is chosen as the battlefield. Antony and Cleopatra gather the largest fleet the world has seen since Alexander the Great. 500 warships, more than 75,000 men. Octavian's Roman force is smaller, but on his side is the brilliant naval commander, Agrippa. With stealth and surprise, Agrippa quickly traps Antony and Cleopatra's forces at the Bay of Actium. For 4 months, the blockade drags on. To escape, Antony's officers favor a land battle, but Cleopatra will not abandon her ships. On September the 2nd, 31 BC, her fleet moves out to meet the Roman navy. The Battle of Actium is a fiasco. Cleopatra's squadron of 60 ships slips through the Roman lines and escapes with the treasury of Egypt intact. Antony quickly follows, leaving his fleet behind to be crushed by Octavian's forces. The Romans boast that Cleopatra fled in womanly cowardice, and lovesick Antony chased after her. But modern analysis suggests the retreat from battle was prearranged.
And Antony followed her because he needed to break out, and he intended that the entire fleet should follow him. In fact, for reasons which have been greatly disputed to do with wind and weather, the fleet failed to follow. So what happened at Actium was bad luck, but it wasn't the result of womanly cowardice.
Aboard Cleopatra's flagship, Antony sits alone for 3 days, unable to speak. The treasury they have saved is rich enough to build another navy, but they soon learn their forces everywhere are defecting to Octavian. Disheartened, they return to Alexandria. Cleopatra's dreams of a new world order are smashed. She knows Octavian will soon hunt them down. Bravely, she organizes feasts and persuades Antony to join her. Their friends call themselves those who are going to die together. Cleopatra prepares for the ordeal to come. In the spring of 30 BC, Cleopatra learns that Octavian is on his way with his armies. She offers to abdicate if her children can rule in her place. Mark Antony offers his life to save Cleopatra's. Octavian ignores their pleas. Initially, Antony's forces defeat Octavian's advanced cavalry. But that night, the eerie sound of instruments and singing is heard, as if a troop of revelers were leaving the city. The people say Antony's god Dionysus is abandoning him. The next day, hearing a rumor that Cleopatra is dead, Antony stabs himself. He is brought to Cleopatra and dies in her arms. Capture by Octavian is a fate Cleopatra cannot bear. She chooses history's most famous suicide. In her last message, she asks Octavian to bury her at Antony's side.
And so, unlike most people who would maybe compromise their principles, Cleopatra says, well, I tried to do it and I can't, so she commits suicide, realizing that because she cannot get, that goal is unattainable, life may not be worth living.
In death, Cleopatra is dressed in the robes of Isis and wears the crown of divine monarchy. It is not known how she died, but legend has her succumbing to the venom of a cobra, smuggled in a basket of figs. 2 faint puncture marks are found on her arm. It is a most fitting death for the Queen of Egypt. The cobra is a sacred animal, companion of Isis and protector of the pharaohs. Its bite is thought to confer immortality. In the last of her great spectacles, Cleopatra proclaims her destiny as a goddess. After Cleopatra's death, Octavian immediately has her son Caesarion killed, but her 3 children by Antony are spared. Octavian takes over Egypt as a province of the Roman Empire. He rules for another 45 years, the emperor of Rome when Christ is born. An age is over. At its beginning looms Alexander the Great. At its end, the last queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. They shared the dream of a glorious empire of the East and West. And the radiance of the dreamers lives on. For 2,000 years, the Western world remembered the Roman story of Cleopatra, the wicked temptress, the lover of Caesar and Antony. But we are learning of the very different version that prevailed in Egypt. There, for hundreds of years after her death, Cleopatra was revered as a heroic and brilliant patriot.
A queen who reconstructed her country, a working queen, and a queen who kept Rome at bay for 20 years.
By the end of Cleopatra's reign, she had ruled so efficiently that her treasure was enough to cause interest rates in Rome to fall by over 2/3 when the treasure was brought back to Rome.
And what makes the character of Cleopatra so wonderful is she's not behaving like a man or a woman, but she's behaving, in my view, the way a very, very morally driven, purposeful individual would.
She had all the qualities of a ruler, period, man or woman.
700 years after her death, an Egyptian holy man calls her the most illustrious and wise among women. It is the kind of immortality Cleopatra herself might have chosen. The eternal destiny of the real Cleopatra.